For decades there was something wrong with the oldest skeletons in the Americas. They did not look like the people who live here now. Narrow faces, long brain cases, teeth that projected forward. One researcher described the pattern as roughly the opposite of a modern Native American face. And here is the part that made it explosive. Those old skulls looked less like the people of China, Korea and Japan, and more like modern populations of Africa, Australia and the southern Pacific Rim. That mismatch was not a small technical point. It was the reason serious scientists proposed that the first people to arrive here and the people living here today might have come from two different places entirely. The answer to that argument was lying at the bottom of a flooded hole in the Yucatan under 100 feet of water, beside the skeleton of a saber-toothed cat. In 2007, a team of cave divers was mapping a system called Sac Acton, about 8 kilometers inland from the Caribbean coast of Mexico. Flooded tunnels running under the jungle. The team was led by a diver named Alberto Nava. The route into this particular chamber goes like this: down a 30-foot ladder into a sinkhole, then 200 feet of horizontal tunnel, and then the floor is simply gone. What opens up is a bell-shaped void more than 100 feet deep, and by one description, roughly the size of a professional basketball arena. Their dive lights did not reach the walls. They could not see the bottom, so they named it Hoyo Negro, black hole. When they got down there, the floor was covered in bones. One of the scientists later compared it to a miniature version of the La Brea tar pits, without the tar and with far better preservation. 26 species of large animal, giant ground sloths, gomphotheres, which were elephant relatives, saber-toothed cats, cave bears, pumas, coyotes, bobcats. And lying among all of it was a nearly complete human skull, resting against an upper arm bone. Nothing was buried. There is almost no sediment settling in that chamber, so those bones have been lying in open view on the floor, waiting for 13,000 years. The divers did not excavate anything, they swam over it and looked down. A person cannot get to the bottom of that chamber without technical dive gear. She did not have any. The answer changes the entire picture, because 13,000 years ago that cave was dry. Sea levels were far lower. The whole system was open passages you could walk into carrying a torch. Hoyo Negro was not a flooded pit. It was a hole in the floor of a dark cave, and once you were in it, there was no way out. The region at the time was extremely arid. The reading of the research team is that she was probably looking for water. There may have been an intermittent puddle at the bottom of that shaft, and in the dark she went over the edge. Her pelvis is broken in two places, and the break across the upper edge of the pubic bone has jagged edges, which is what fresh bone does. She fell more than 100 feet and hit something hard enough to shatter it. The water came much later as the ice sheets melted and the sea rose. Sea level data indicates the chamber, which now sits about 130 feet below sea level, went under somewhere between about 10,200 and 9,700 years ago, which means the flood that drowned that cave is the only reason there is anything left of her at all. The divers named her Naia after the water nymphs of Greek mythology. She was 15 or 16 years old, about 5 feet tall, and at her heaviest, when she was eating properly, around 111 pounds, and her bones carry a record of her life that is difficult to read without flinching. She has Harris lines. Those are marks that form inside a growing bone when the body stops developing, which happens during periods of serious hunger. She has several. She went without food repeatedly. Her pelvis suggests she may have given birth in the months before she died. And there is one more thing on her skeleton, older than the fall. Both bones of her left forearm carry fractures that had healed. The radius, the outer bone of the forearm, was broken in a spiral. A spiral fracture is not what happens when you land badly. It is what happens when something twists an arm while holding on to it. The research team's own assessment is that it may have come from a parent or an assailant, and they say may, and I'm going to say it exactly as carefully as they did. 15 years old, hungry often enough that her skeleton kept a record of it, possibly already a mother, and carrying an old injury in her arm that healed wrong. We tend to talk about the first Americans as though they were an accomplishment. She sounds to me like somebody just trying to get through a bad year Her skull is intact. For a human skeleton of that age anywhere in the Americas, that is close to unheard of. And that skull is where this stops being a story about a cave. Her face is narrow, wide set eyes, a low prominent forehead, a low flat nose, teeth angled outward. This is the pattern archaeologists call Paleoamerican, and it is not the pattern you see in modern Native Americans. So understand where this sits. If all you had was her skull, this skeleton looks like the strongest evidence anyone had ever found for a separate founding population. That is exactly what some people expected it to be. Then they tried to date her, and the bones would not cooperate. She is heavily mineralized. The minerals in that water had worked into her skeleton over 13,000 years, which made the bones hard and sharp-edged and superb for measuring. It also meant there was no collagen left in them. No collagen, no radiocarbon date. The thing that preserved her shape had erased her clock, so they went around it 3 separate ways. They uranium-dated tiny calcite crystals called florets that had grown on the surface of her bones, which gave them a minimum age. They radiocarbon dated the enamel of her teeth, which gave them a maximum. And they radiocarbon dated bat droppings from elsewhere in the cave system to pin down the wider chronology: calcite, tooth enamel, and guano. That is how you date the most important skeleton in the Americas when the bone itself has nothing left to give, 12 to 13,000 years old, which left the harder question. And one more thing to try. The team took a molar and attempted a DNA extraction on the outside chance that a fragment of anything had survived 13,000 years in warm water. They did not expect it to work. Everything rested on whether one tooth had held on to something. I find that a genuinely uncomfortable margin. A 40-year argument, and the deciding evidence is whether a single molar kept a trace of a girl who fell down a hole. It kept it. The mitochondrial DNA came back and the result was haplogroup D1. That lineage is Beringian in origin. It is one of the founding maternal lines of the Americas, and it is carried by living Native Americans today, by around 10% of them overall, and by nearly a third of Indigenous people in parts of Chile and Argentina. So both things are true at once. Her face does not match, her maternal line does. And that combination collapses the argument, because it means the difference in skull shape is not evidence of separate ancestry. It is evidence of change happening in place after the founding population had already split from its Siberian ancestors. Paleoamericans and modern Native Americans are the same people, separated by enough time for a face to move further than anyone had allowed for. The competing model does not survive it. The finding landed harder than it should have, and the reason is, who signed the paper? The scientist who led the Naia study, James Chatters, was also the first scientist to examine Kennewick Man. That was the roughly 9,000-year-old skeleton found in Washington state in 1996, whose skull shape set off 2 decades of argument, litigation, and real damage the relationship between archaeologists and Native American communities. That entire conflict rested on the same question. Does a skull that looks unfamiliar mean a different people? Naia answers it with a case where both halves of the evidence sit inside one body and disagree with each other. A wrong idea can hold for 40 years purely because nobody has found a body carrying both halves of the answer. The chamber itself is now a problem. It is a sealed environment described as a time capsule of the end of the Ice Age, and it is also completely unguardable. Unauthorized divers got in to take photographs, and in the process they moved and damaged bones. Part of her remains were removed afterwards for safekeeping. The isolation that preserved her for 13,000 years is exactly what makes her impossible to protect now. Strip everything else away, and this is what remains. She was one girl, alone in the dark, looking for water, and she stepped into a hole. There was nothing significant about her death, no burial, no marker, and nobody came looking. She fell, and the cave kept her, and 8,000 years of rising water sealed the door behind her. And she ended an argument that had been running since long before anyone knew her name, by accident, by falling into just about the only place on the continent where a body could last that long. Everyone else who could answer the rest of our questions is in ground that did not keep them. There is more of that chamber the team has not reached. Crevices and holes they intend to go back into. Subscribe and I will tell you what comes up. Thanks for watching.